Confession, Protestant view of. Confession of sins is an acknowledgement of sin, which may be made by a Christian either to God alone, to a fellow Christian, or to one who holds an ecclesiastical office. Confession as an act prescribed or recommended by the Church is made in accordance with the free decision of the individual. Voluntary private confession, in compliance with special rules of church training and discipline, confession of catechumens and penitents, and in conformity with general regulations binding on all, a prescribed confession, either of individuals or the congregation as a whole. The present article is confined to the last named form. Its end is to attain absolution. The New Testament knows nothing of confession as a formal institution. James 5:16 referring to the close association with the brethren, although the words of Jesus in Luke 5:27-48, may be compared to ecclesiastical absolution. Individual confession as a part of ecclesiastical discipline was, of course, customary in ancient times, and also served as a voluntary act of a distressed sinner. The confession of sin and proclamation of pardon were likewise customary in the service of the ancient church. But that confession existed in the earliest time as an established ecclesiastical institution is not proved by such isolated instances as are occasionally met with. The New Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge, Volume Ill, Art, Confession, p. 221. Confession, Roman Catholic view of. Confession is the avowal of one's own sins made to a duly authorized priest for the purpose of obtaining their forgiveness through the power of the keys. How firmly rooted in the Catholic mind is the belief in the efficacy and necessity of confession, appears clearly from the fact that the sacrament of penance endures in the Church after the countless attacks to which it has been subjected during the last 4 centuries. If at the Reformation or since the Church could have surrendered a doctrine or abandoned a practice for the sake of peace and to soften a hard saying, confession would have been the first to disappear. Yet it is precisely during this period that the Church has defined in the most exact terms the nature of penance and most vigorously insisted on the necessity of confession. As the Council of Trent affirms, the Church did not through the Lateran Council prescribe that the faithful of Christ should confess, a thing which it knew to be by divine right the necessary and established, but that the precept of confessing at least once a year should be complied with by all and everyone when they reach the age of discretion. Session 14, c. 5. The Lateran edicts presuppose the necessity of confession as an article of Catholic belief, and lay down a law as to the minimum frequency of confession, at least once a year. What sins are to be confessed? Among the propositions condemned by the Council of Trent is the following: that to obtain forgiveness of sins in the sacrament of penance, it is not necessary by a divine law to confess each and every mortal sin which is called to mind by due and careful examination, to confess even hidden sins and those that are against the last 2 precepts of the Decalogue, together with the circumstances that change the specific nature of the sin. Such confession is only useful for the instruction and consolation of the penitent, and of old was practiced merely in order to impose canonical satisfaction. Can. Depamit. Canon on Penance, 7. Satisfaction. As stated above, the absolution given by the priest to a penitent who confesses his sins with the proper dispositions remits both the guilt and the eternal punishment of mortal sin. There remains, however, some indebtedness to divine justice which must be cancelled here or hereafter. In order to have it cancelled here, the penitent receives from his confessor what is usually called his penance, usually in the form of certain prayers which he is to say, or of certain actions which he is to perform, such as visits to a church, the Stations of the Cross, etc. Almsdeeds, fasting, and prayer are the chief means of satisfaction, but other penitential works may also be enjoined. The Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 11, Art, Penance, Subdivision, Confession, 9 pp. 625-628, Confession, Auricular, established by Innocent III. Not only did Innocent III thus provide himself with an ecclesiastical militia suited to meet the obviously impending insurrection, he increased his power greatly but insidiously by the formal introduction of auricular confession. It was by the Fourth Lateran Council that the necessity of auricular confession was first formally established. Its aim was that no heretic should escape, and that the absent priest should be paramount. even in the domestic circle. In none but a most degraded and superstitious society can such an infamous institution be tolerated. It invades the sacred privacy of life, makes a man's wife, children, and servants his spies and accusers. When any religious system stands in need of such a social immorality, we may be sure that it is irrecoverably diseased, and hastening to its end. Auricular confession led to an increasing necessity for casuistry, though that science was not fully developed until the time of the Jesuits, when it gave rise to an extensive literature, with a lax system and a false morality, guiding the penitent rather with a view to his usefulness to the Church than to his own reformation, and not hesitating at singular indecencies in its portion having reference to married life. History of the Intellectual Development of Europe, 1 John William Draper, M.D., LL.D., Volume 2, pp. 65, 66, New York, Harper D. Brothers, copyright 1876.